So the presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump has just finished. We have, of course, this much anticipated face-off between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris taking place today in the American city of Philadelphia. A number of issues raised, ranging from the economy to hot-button social issues like abortion to foreign policy questions like Afghanistan and the fate of American alliances like NATO, as well as the ongoing war in Ukraine. There's a lot to unpack here. So joining us now is one of India's finest diplomats, a former ambassador to the United States, Meera Shankar. Ambassador Shankar, thank you so much for joining us. Could you begin by perhaps laying out what you thought were the big issues that came up during this debate, just the big takeaways that you have come away with on this morning of the debate?
Well, it's very clear that there are two different visions of America. You know, on the one hand, you have Donald Trump, who has played on fears and anxieties, particularly amongst white Americans, about possible demographic changes in future and about who gets to control the American polity and economy. This is an underlying theme of Donald Trump's emphasis on immigrants coming over and taking over America and take your country back. And, you know, so he's playing on anxieties and fears, and he paints a very negative picture of America, which he is going to make great again. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, plays on visions of a more optimistic future and helping middle-class Americans to realize the American dream. So there are two different visions of America. Trump was more forceful in his presentation, as he usually is, but also many factual inaccuracies in what he was saying. You know, like many states allow babies to be killed after they are born, which is not true. So exaggerations and factual inaccuracies are plenty in what he says, but he has a more forceful way of delivering his message. Kamala, I think, tries to be reasonable and presidential in the way in which she put across her point of view. And what struck me was that she had more detailed plans in a number of areas. She had specific proposals that she put forward. On the economy, it is the benefits for, children, family benefits for children of $6,000, of helping first-time home owners with the down payment, of reducing the price of medicines. So there are very specific proposals that she's made on the economy. And she attacked Trump's proposed tariff hikes, which he called a sales tax of 20%, because he proposes an across-the-board tariff of 20% on all imports coming into the US and higher tariffs on imports coming in from China. So she called it a sales tax of 20%, which will add to the cost of living for ordinary American consumers by a substantial amount. Trump didn't come out with any specific proposals. He has separately said he will extend his tax cuts, which had benefited the very wealthy, including the billionaires, and had no tax cuts actually for the lowest wage earners in his tax proposals of 2017, which he now says he will extend. Beyond that, he really didn't come out with anything specific. Going beyond the debate, Kamala has said that she will not tax people earning below $400,000, but will raise money for her programs through increasing A, corporate taxes, and B, increasing taxes for Americans who earn more than $400,000, and special taxes for those who are billionaires. So that is how she proposes to raise the money. So two very different visions of America on the economy. On climate change, clearly, Trump was waffling. He really didn't come across with anything specific beyond saying the Democrats killed the Keystone pipeline, which was the Alaskan pipeline bringing oil from Alaska. So on climate change, no specifics from Trump, but very forceful climate denial and a push for fossil fuels, which he says he will, promote. And on the other hand, from Kamala, a commitment, but measured in the sense that she has nuanced her position, now agreeing to fracking, and that they will use diverse forms of energy. So not really giving a commitment to phase out, but certainly saying that they will promote green energy and they will promote cleaner forms of energy, while at the same time not disrupting fracking. So
Ambassador, if I could ask you, Ambassador, if I could ask you, you've talked a little bit about the substantive policy questions. I'd like to get to that in a minute. If I could ask you, this is the first coming off the back of President Joe Biden's performance against Donald Trump a couple of months back, which of course led to a widespread pressure on him to leave the race. Could I ask you to comment a little bit about the Democrats and the Republicans? Do you feel that the Democrats will feel that Kamala Harris has done a strong job? Has she bolstered her candidacy with this performance and as compared to Trump? Do you think that both sides have sort of hit their messages right, or do you believe that either side could have done better? Just how do your view on how you think the Democrats or the Republicans will view how their candidates have done?
Both sides have put across a very different vision of America, and to convinced followers, I'm not sure that they are going to move the needle. Because you have two parallel universes in America. If you watch Fox News on the one hand and you watch MSNBC on the other hand, you might be talking about two separate countries. So there are two very different visions of America, and both have put their visions forward. And so those who are already convinced or committed, I don't think this is going to move the needle as far as they're concerned. So both are really plugging for the undecided voter in the middle and who has not made up their mind. So that, I think, is something which both were trying to. I think Kamala, in a more measured way, Trump appealing more to his own constituency, though on issues like abortion, he has, basically said that he has left it to the states. He is not going to go for an abortion ban, but he's left it to the states to vote. And Kamala said 20 states have voted, Republican governed states have voted to ban abortion. So both have tried to nuance their position. I think Kamala appeared more centrist. Donald Trump appeared, as usual, with a slightly more radical message.
Understood.
I would say that, both performed to the expectation of their followers. Though Kamala's message had more detail and appeared more crafted to appeal to centrist voters.
Understood. Ambassador, could I ask you to talk a little bit about some of the specific proposals now? If I could ask you to go issue by issue and ask you for brief answers on them. Number one, there's been a lot of conversation about these Trump tariffs. You already mentioned this in your conversation, but this has been something of a running concern, and people, including former Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale, also raised this concern that Donald Trump's administration seems intent on slapping tariffs on countries that it thinks have shortchanged it when it comes to trade. India is a country that enjoys a trade surplus with the Americans, and there is key people who advise Donald Trump on economic issues who seem to believe that India is a country that gets away with high tariffs, high taxes. So this could be a policy that Donald Trump was talking about that could actually end up impacting India. Could I ask you to comment a little bit about Trump's comments on tariffs, his policies, how he views this issue, and how India could be affected by it?
Look, he is saying that he will impose 10 to 20% tariffs across the board on all imports into the US. So clearly that is going to impact Indian exports to the US as well. Secondly, he's saying that he will raise tariffs on China by up to 50% or even more if required. So what this could do is to trigger some kind of global trade war or enhanced global protectionism, which will impact the global economy. And last time Trump was there, I think India was impacted because he put tariffs, unilateral tariffs, on steel and aluminium exports to the United States from India. After 2 years, India put retaliatory tariffs on an equivalent amount of imports from the US. They tried to negotiate in those 2 years. It didn't go anywhere. Then he removed GSP, the zero duty entry for certain Indian goods, so which had given them a cost advantage in the US market. Then in the WTO, he pushed for removing India's developing country status and really tightened the H-1B visa process, making it difficult for our companies to send experts from here, or unpredictable, let's say, and forcing them to open offices in the US, which obviously then eats into their competitiveness because they have to pay much higher wages in the US. All in all, on the economic front, I think the relationship between India and the US was tense during Donald Trump's time, and all the negotiations that we had, we were unable to resolve the trade frictions between the two countries.
So, if I could also ask you on some key foreign policy questions that came up. Let me start with Ukraine. Donald Trump did not actually categorically, he was asked twice whether he believed it was in America's national interest for Ukraine to win the war. And he said, actually, what I think is in America's interest is for the war to end. So, could I ask you to see how this will play? Kamala Harris, of course, accused him of trying to make friends with Putin, who would, to use her phrase, eat him for breakfast. Could I ask you to talk a little bit about how Ukraine featured in the debate?
Well, Kamala Harris has committed to continuing Biden's policy of supporting Ukraine to the end. And she's made it a principle of, the US standing up for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a European country and of democracy. Trump, on the other hand, did not answer that question, whether he wants Ukraine to win. He said he wants the war to end. When asked how he proposes to end the war, he did not come up with any specific proposal and said that I could end it in 24 hours, even before I actually take over the presidency. When I'm president-elect, I can end it. And Kamala said that you can end it by just caving in, So that means basically you stop aid to Ukraine and you push Ukraine to have negotiations with Russia. Now, from India's point of view, we've always held that solutions in Ukraine will not emerge from the battlefield, and that the military conflict which is taking place is putting pressure, particularly on developing countries, through higher oil and grain prices, higher fertilizer prices, and that therefore it is in the interest of the world to end it, that, as two superpowers are involved, one directly and one by proxy, that there is a danger of nuclear escalation. So from India's point of view, a policy which looks to end the Ukraine war in an orderly way I think, is something which we welcome. But on the other hand, on Gaza, I think Trump has made no statements at all about even wanting to end the conflict in Gaza. So on the one hand, he would probably have a more pragmatic approach on Ukraine. And then, of course, he also gave a contradictory thing, saying that Europe should take on more of the burden of financing Ukraine's conflict with Russia. So on the one hand, he says he wants to end it. On the other hand, he says he will push Europe to take on more of the burden of financing Ukraine. So we really don't know where he'll go, but I think his intention is to try to end the conflict. In Gaza, he would give Israel an even freer hand. I think there's been criticism that the Biden administration was too late and perhaps weak in pressurizing Netanyahu government to agree to a ceasefire. They have been pushing now in recent months for a ceasefire deal and the return of hostages, and eventually leading to negotiations on a two-state solution, but without success.
Understood.
As yet. Trump, on the other hand, has really not said anything about bringing the conflict to an end, and he probably will give Israel a free hand.
Understood. Ambassador, could I also ask you to talk a little bit about how Afghanistan came up in the conversation in the debate between the two candidates? Of course, Kamala Harris blaming Trump, saying that it was Trump who bypassed the Afghan government and negotiated with the Taliban and said that they would get out. Trump hit back and said that the withdrawal was was badly organized, was chaotic, and that the Taliban did not adhere to the agreement that was signed, and therefore, the Biden administration was essentially suckered into doing whatever it did. Could I ask you to talk a little bit about how Afghanistan featured into the conversation, how you felt the two candidates handled it?
Look, I think that one thing was clear, that there was exhaustion in the US about the war in Afghanistan, and both parties, whether it was Republican or Democrats, wanted to cut their losses and get out. Yes, Trump began the negotiations with Taliban directly, bypassing the Afghan government, thereby undermining the Afghan government, and he agreed to release quite a large number of Taliban prisoners, which were there. I think Kamala Harris had 5,000, so quite a large number, and said that they were great people and they were great and so on. And Biden continued with the policy of exiting Afghanistan. Taliban moved in more quickly than anticipated. The Afghan government collapsed more quickly than anticipated. And it was a chaotic withdrawal, which really did not do credit to America. But Kamala finessed it by saying that, everybody wanted to get out, but Biden is the one who was able to accomplish the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, and now they are not spending a single dollar, nor are there any American troops in any country in the world. That's what she said. Engaged in conflict in any country in the world. And it's true, in Ukraine, they have not agreed to put boots on the ground.
Understood. Ma'am, could I ask you then, just to close off, two questions. Number one, you have been, you served at the highest levels of Indian diplomacy. Could I ask you to put on your hat as a diplomat as well, and tell us a little bit about, do you think that Indian decision makers will take away any key points from this debate? There was Trump talking about his tariff policy, his views on alliances like NATO, his potential policy on something like Ukraine, Kamala Harris talking about her policy in West Asia. So could I ask you, if you were an Indian policymaker looking at this debate, are there any key takeaways that would stand out for New Delhi?
Well, I think that what really appears to us is that America is quite divided. But there are some points of consensus which actually are of interest to India. For instance, on China. I think now both the Democrats and the Republicans do view China as a strategic competitor. The Trump tariffs, which were imposed by President Trump, were continued by the Biden administration, which further refined its China policy by putting selective sanctions on high technology items such as computer chips and semiconductors, not just the export of the chips themselves, but also technology and of information pertaining to it. And these sanctions extend even to other countries where there may be US components in their technology or in their chips. They have to get US prior permission in order to export. It's clear that both, as I said, parties see China as a competitor, a strategic competitor, and therefore both really will give importance to India as part of their strategic balancing in Asia. I think Biden has been more systematic about it by putting in place, AUKUS, the Japan, South Korea, US trilateral summit, the raising the Quad to summit level. So he's been more systematic about creating the coalitions, renewing the defense agreement for bases in Philippines. He's been more systematic about putting in place the coalitions and alliances which would help to balance China. Trump has talked a good game with China. He's been, quite critical of China, but he has also not been very predictable in terms of how he would stand by allies in the event of any conflict with China. More recently, there was a statement on Taiwan where, again, he said Taiwan should pay us for helping to defend them. Or earlier, there have been his statements on Japan and South Korea saying, what are our troops doing there? So, I think the reliability of the US as a strategic ally comes into greater question with Trump. Though both would have, broadly similar policies, Biden in a more systematic and thought out way, Trump, more instinctively and chaotically.
Understood. Ambassador Meera Shankar, thank you so much for joining us, explaining what's happened in the debate, what the key issues are, how you felt the two candidates performed, as well as what India will look at when it thinks about this presidential election debate. Thank you so much again, Ambassador Shankar, and thank you to our viewers for watching India Today Global.
Thank you.